Hello and welcome to Connect. I'm your host, Randy Shabilo. Today's show will have City Archivist Jeff O'Brien talking about the upcoming bridge openings, as well as the marketing manager for La Troupe de Jour, Emily Labelle. And as always, we'd like to connect with you.
Tweet us at Shaw TV Saskatoon. Follow us on Facebook. Check out Shaw TV Saskatoon on YouTube to watch past episodes, or email shawtv10@shaw.ca with any future guest or topic suggestions.
Saskatoon's 2 new bridges are opening in early October, and I've invited City Archivist Jeff O'Brien to come and give us some sense of history in terms of how these bridges came to be and the importance of that river crossing in the City of Bridges. Jeff, thank you for making time for us today.
Oh, Randy, thank you for having me.
Take us back to the early river crossings and how it came to be that at the start of the city of Saskatoon, how we got across the river and how we are here today.
Well, okay, so back in the day, right, this is the thing about bridges, right? We have this burning desire to cross them, right? Bridges are barriers, we've got to get back and forth across them. And back in the day, they would look for a shallow place and they'd ford the river. In wintertime, just walk across because that's the nature of winter. But as the population in this part of the world grew, we needed something a little more reliable, a little more consistent. And so that means a ferry crossing, right? A boat that runs back and forth across the river. And there was, I think the first ferry crossing in this area was established in 1871 at Batoche by a guy named Xavier Latendre. And then, of course, Gabriel Dumont built his crossing at Dumont's Crossing a couple years later. In Saskatoon, and the reason why Saskatoon is where it is because this was where they were determined that it would be a good location for a ferry crossing, because the original Saskatoon colony, 1883, both sides of the river, so you got to get back and forth. And one of the first things that new colonists did here was build a ferry crossing. And so there's always problems with the ferry crossing, always problems with the ferry crossing. It was slow, it was awkward, it was unreliable, it got stuck. It didn't run when the water was too high, it didn't run when the water was too low, it didn't run when the wind was blowing too hard or when the ferry master was busy doing something different, right? People complained about the ferry crossing really from the very beginning. And so what we really needed was a bridge. In 1890, they built a railway bridge through Saskatoon where the Buckwell Bridge is now. And that was fine. A lot of people crossed on the railway bridge. They just, parked their horse on the other side and walk into Saskatoon across the bridge. There's always problems with that. It didn't have a pedestrian crossing, right? There was no area for people to walk on, right? So you're walking right in the middle of the bridge, and railway bridges, occasionally a train comes the other way. And so that was always a problem. So really, as Saskatoon became a substantial settled community, it was clear that we needed a traffic bridge. And this is why the name, right? Before 1907, there were railway bridges on the South Saskatchewan, but there was no bridge dedicated for people and for vehicles. And so when they finally decided to build one in 1906, they called it the traffic bridge. And so the traffic bridge, it remained. And when it opened on October 10th, 1907, it was a red letter day, maybe the biggest day in the city's history, just because of how important. You can't have a city on both sides of the river without at least one bridge linking the two parts. And so that's the beginning of the traffic bridge in Saskatoon. Now, fast forward over time, right, and they all sorts of changes over time, right? They added a pedestrian footbridge on the one side, right, and a couple years later. And then in 1913, they started running streetcars across the bridge, part of the transit system, the municipal railway system. And that was always a bit of an issue because, the old traffic bridge was very skinny. And so you put a streetcar on that and it really blocked traffic up in a big way, much to the unhappiness of people. We were very pleased in the 1930s when they built the Broadway Bridge and they moved the streetcar tracks off the traffic bridge. And of course, over time, there was other sort of improvements. In the early 60s, they raised the one end of it at the south end, and they built an interchange there on Victoria and the Long Hill. Short Hill, you have two hills, Short Hill and Long Hill. Short Hill is Victoria, because it's short and steep, and the Long Hill is the long kind of gradual road that runs down from Broadway. And those are the two accesses to the traffic bridge. Anyway, so in 61, they rebuilt that to make the interchange that most of us are familiar with. They filled in part of the river there. Rotary Park is all landfill. It was not landfilled in terms of a dump, but clean fill from basement excavations and stuff. That was all filled in about 65 to build Rotary Park. The width of the bridge was always a problem, and that sort of sort of a funny thing because the new bridge is much wider than the old bridge, and that's kind of sad because the traffic bridge, the width of the traffic bridge was kind of a rite of passage for generations of Saskatoon young drivers, being forced to make their first white-knuckled trip across this narrow little bridge. My elder siblings back in the early 60s used to call it the scary bridge because, you're right there. Anyway, so that's our traffic bridge. In the fullness of time, it began to deteriorate. In 2005, the bridge was closed. 2005, 2006 was closed while a bunch of repairs were done because the steel had rusted so badly. And then that bought us about 4 more years. And then in 2010, the engineers took another look and they said, this bridge, it's going to fall down. And so then the question is, what do we do with the bridge? Right? So, okay, we're going to tear the old one down, but what are we going to put up there? And people said, well, do we need a bridge? Or could we have a pedestrian bridge? Which are both really good questions. But there are, even 2005, there were like 10,000 cars a day on the traffic bridge. And that's only going to get worse, right? So I think the answer was yes, we needed a new bridge, and we needed it to be more than simply a pedestrian bridge. So there was a lot of push from the community to recreate the style of the old bridge. The original traffic bridge is what was called a camelback Parker through truss bridge. So it's a camelback, right?
Oh yes, of course.
Oh, isn't that a great name? So it's a camelback because it's got a kind of a rounded top, and it's a through truss because you drive through the trusses. And so what they settled on the final design for the new traffic bridge, they went with a through truss a Parker through truss bridge. So it very much mimics the style of the original. It's much wider. So it'll be a little less scary to people who cross unless you want to be frightened, and then I suppose you could drive too fast. No, don't do that. So it's quite a bit wider, and it has 2 footpaths on either side, like for bicycles and pedestrians, and they are significantly wider than the one that was there before too. So it's going to be a much more convenient bridge for the people of Saskatoon to drive across on, and a little bit less scary. And the new bridge is rated for 100 years.
Oh.
The old bridge made it
talking
100
about that
years. So.
at that time. Can you just go back and touch on the streetcars, because there's a lot of our viewing population that will recall and remember the streetcars in Saskatoon and the routing that they had back then.
Right.
How did they get up the I guess it would be the short hill?
No, the long hill. They made,
Well,
so
that was on Broadway then.
Yeah,
right?
so this is the problem, right? Okay, so the streetcars come across the traffic bridge, because until 1931, it's the only way to get across from downtown to Newtana. Come across the traffic bridge, if you're on a streetcar. And then they got to make a tight left and go up the long hill, right? Because the grade on Victoria is way too steep for the streetcars. So they have to make a tight left and go up the long hill. The grade on Long Hill was almost too much for the streetcars too. And they would have to, sand the tracks. And then when it got icy, you could have little issues, right, getting up the hill. Coming down the hill was sometimes problematic. There were 2 derailments, two sort of important derailments coming down the hill. One in 1918 or 1920, anyway, a streetcar jumped the track coming down the hill. And luckily, there was a telephone pole right at the end of Long Hill before you made the turn onto the traffic bridge, and it banged into this telephone pole and stopped. A couple years later, 1922, there was another derailment. This one hit the same telephone pole and bounced off and kept going right over the bank and end over end down the bank. And fortunately, it landed on its wheels, right? The streetcar's got big, heavy railway trucks at the base, and then this flimsy wooden shelter on top. And so luckily it landed on its wheels. If it had landed on its roof, it would have crushed everyone inside. As it was, there were injuries of people taken to hospital, but no one was killed. It was actually a small miracle that crowded streetcar, that people in that streetcar survived the accident. So it was getting back and forth across Newtana was a problem, right? They had to use the shorter cars, the single truck streetcars, partly because of the turn at the end, and also because of worries about the weight of the larger streetcars. And so that reduced the service that was available for people in Newtana, right? So when they built the Broadway Bridge, finished in 1931. So one of the first things they did was to reroute the streetcars so that they crossed on the Broadway Bridge, which was much more convenient and way less issue with traffic, right? No more sitting behind a streetcar while it dawdled its way across the traffic bridge and you're waiting in your car.
So we have two bridges that are opening in Saskatoon.
We do.
And what are the names and what's going to happen?
Well, okay, so the Chief Mistawasis Bridge, which is connects the North Commuter Parkway with the north side of Saskatoon, and the traffic bridge, and they're both opening in October, early in October, and they're going to be opening ceremonies on both on the same. It's on the same day, right? So there'll be opening ceremonies at both bridges, and everybody's welcome to come out. There'll be all sorts of things to do and see. And I'm going to be on the traffic bridge. They've got a booth, and I'm talking about the history of bridges in Saskatoon from a booth on the traffic bridge. And there'll be it's going to be a big party. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually. In fact, at the planning committee, we call it Bridge Party. So people in the city say Bridge Party, they mean Bridge Party.
We're well known for that.
We're well known for that.
I just want to ask you again, in terms of the traffic bridge, it's had many names over the years.
Right.
The Victoria Bridge,
Right,
Steel
right.
Bridge, and
Yeah. Black Bridge, some
Yeah,
people even called
yeah.
it. Yeah. So
what have you learned in your role as an archivist in terms of all the bridges we have, just in their significance for the population? Does it bring the city together? It makes it easier to get around?
Well,
that
that's
type
the
of-
nature of
yeah?
bridges. I mean, otherwise we'd be stuck trying to cross on the ferry, right?
Yeah.
The other name for ferry is scow. That's not a nice name. So the bridges are critically important to Saskatoon. Now, I'll tell you something. There has never been a time in our history when we haven't needed a new bridge. Not in 1883, and not today, not ever. As soon as the original traffic bridge was built in 1907, we needed a new bridge, right? Because Saskatoon was growing by leaps and bounds, and we didn't get a new bridge for another 9 years. The University Bridge opened in 1916, and we were way past time when we needed a new bridge by the time the University Bridge opened. So it's sort of a truism in the history of Saskatoon that we always need a new bridge. The exception is now. These two bridges are going to open next month, and at that point, we are not going to need a new bridge for now.
Can you share with us then, if we look back at all the railway bridges that were in existence pre-1900, and this traffic bridge, at the time it was implemented to go ahead with it in 06, 07, it opened. It was significant in terms of its length and importance to traffic, not
Right.
just trains.
And not trains at all.
At all,
There's no
certainly, yeah.
railways, no trains crossing on the traffic bridge. Although I have heard people say, "Oh yeah, that's the old railway bridge," but that's just confusing because there used to be a railway bridge. Where the Buckwald Bridge is now was the
That's the old
location of the CNR bridge, and of course that's the first railway bridge, the location of the first railway bridge to come to Saskatoon. That's 1890. That's a long time ago. So the other railway bridges, the CP and the CN. The Grand Trunk Pacific, which is the
Right.
CN down by Diefenbaker Park. Those are still there, and they go back to the early 1900s as well.
Jeff, I want to thank you for making time and enlightening us on that fantastic history, and we'll see you on the bridge at the Bridge Party.
All right, take care.
We'll be right back.